All right, let's dive into something I find really interesting. We're talking family businesses today. There's companies where the founding family still has a big chunk of the pie, and maybe even, a hand on the steering wheel.
Ah, so we're going to see if those family ties actually help or hurt a company's performance?
Exactly. I think a lot of people have that stereotype in mind, that family businesses are, well, maybe more about family drama than they are about good business decisions.
Yeah, I can see that.
But get this, we dug into some research from the Journal of Finance. It's a paper called Founding Family Ownership and Firm Performance, Evidence from the S&P 500. And, while the findings were pretty darn surprising, turns out family businesses might actually have a secret weapon in the S&P 500.
A secret weapon, huh? I'm intrigued.
Oh, it's good stuff. But first, I gotta share this. It turns out that family businesses are way more common than I would have thought.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This study found that a full third of the S&P 500 companies are actually family controlled.
Wow, a third. That's a much bigger chunk of the market than I would have guessed.
I know, right. And we're not talking about a little mom and pop shop
Mm-hmm.
holding on to a few shares.
Right.
The average family ownership in these companies is something like 18%.
18%, that's a significant chunk.
Definitely. It's not always enough to call all the shots, but it's a big enough stake to have real influence, for sure.
So they're not necessarily running the show, but they're definitely at the table.
Oh, yeah. Maybe even at the head of the table. And this is where things get really interesting, I think. You've got that potential for conflict, don't you?
Conflict.
Yeah, when a family has that much skin in the game, their interests might clash with what's best for the other investors.
I see, yeah.
It's that old saying, don't mix business with family.
Right. Makes sense. That's a
Yeah.
classic concern, for sure. And economists, Fama and Jensen, they've actually done a lot of work on this very thing. They argue that families might prioritize certain things, like keeping the business in the family, or maintaining a certain level of control, even if those decisions don't exactly line up with maximizing profits for, all the shareholders.
That makes sense. If you're choosing between, say, giving your brother a promotion or hiring someone from outside who might be more qualified on paper, but could ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tough balancing act.
Sure.
But here's where things get really interesting. There's another school of thought on this, championed by economists, Demsetz and Len, and they suggested this concentrated ownership, like you see with these founding families, could actually be a good thing.
Wait, really? How so? Isn't that kind of putting all your eggs in one basket?
Well, think of it this way. When a family has so much of their wealth tied up in a company, they're incredibly motivated to see it succeed, maybe even more so than a CEO who might be focused on, just hitting this quarter's numbers and getting that bonus.
I see what you mean. It's like their family name is on the product, on the building, on everything. Their reputation's on the line.
Right.
So they're going to be a lot more careful about making decisions that could hurt the company in the long run. They're not just playing for the next quarter. They're thinking about the next generation.
Exactly. That kind of long-term thinking can make a real difference. And actually, there's a lot of research on this, like economist Jeremy Stein's work. That shows that companies with long-term investors, they're less likely to make those short-sighted decisions, the ones I mean, that boost profits today but ultimately hurt them down the road.
Like how some companies cut back on research and development to make their earnings look better this year, but then they fall behind because they haven't been investing in innovation.
It's about resisting that temptation to go for the quick win, and instead building something that's sustainable and valuable over time. And for family businesses, well, that long-term perspective, it's often just built into their DNA.
Like their core value.
Yeah, exactly. Take the DuPont family, for example. They've held a major stake in their company for over 2 centuries.
2 centuries. Talk about thinking generations ahead.
Right.
That's an incredible example of commitment.
It really is. And that kind of long-term commitment can translate into real financial advantages, too. This study found that family firms often have a lower cost of debt.
Really? Why would that be?
Well, lenders see them as less risky and more trustworthy, I think. Maybe because that family reputation is on the line,
Makes sense.
Lenders feel more confident that family businesses are in it for the long haul and are therefore, more likely to repay their loans.
So it's like they get a family discount when it comes to borrowing money.
You could say that.
Okay, so far it seems like these family businesses are full of surprises. They're more common than we thought.
Mhm.
They've got that long-term thinking baked in, and they even get better loan terms. But what about, the role of family members within the company itself,
Yep.
especially at the top? Does having a family member as CEO help or hurt?
That's a big question, for sure. And the study dives right into it. And the answer is, well, it's complicated.
Yeah, I figured there had to be a catch somewhere. It can't all be smooth sailing.
Oh, you're absolutely right. There are definitely two sides to this coin. What we see is that there are different types of family CEOs, and they don't all have the same impact. When the founder is the CEO, things tend to go pretty well.
I can see that. Like, built the company from scratch. They have that vision, the passion. It's their baby. But, wouldn't you think that that same drive could make them resistant to change? Like, maybe an outside CEO could bring some needed flexibility.
That's a great point. And that's actually something the research looked at. What they found is that those outside CEOs, those professional managers hired by family firms, they also tend to perform well. That can shake things up in a good way.
So we've got founder CEOs who are good and hired CEOs who are good. What about when a descendant of the founder takes over? Is it all downhill from there?
Well, that's where things get a bit less clear-cut. The study found that on average, descendant CEOs don't seem to have the same positive impact on performance as founders or those outside CEOs.
Really? Is that always true? I mean, are there famous examples of companies that thrived under descendant leadership? What about Ford? Didn't they have like a family member as CEO for a really long time?
It's true. There are always exceptions, and the study acknowledges that. But overall,
Yeah.
the data suggests that descendants might not have that same entrepreneurial fire as the founder, nor that breadth of experience that an outside CEO brings to the table. Think of it like this. Founders, they often have that raw talent and instinct, while hired CEOs have the training and the battle scars, so to speak, from navigating all those different business landscapes. Descendants might not have either of those advantages.
So it's not a guarantee, but there's a higher risk of things going sideways when a descendant takes over. We've all heard those stories of, once great companies that fumbled.
Under the leadership of the founder's kid, right?
Absolutely. There are some very high-profile examples. Remember Wang Laboratories?
Oh, yeah.
Incredibly successful tech company under the founder. But when his son took the reins, things took a nosedive. It's a classic cautionary tale.
So if you're sitting at the Thanksgiving table with a family business in the mix, right?
Yeah.
This research might give you some food for thought,
Yeah.
to say the least. Okay, so family firms sometimes do well, sometimes don't, depending on who's at the helm. What's the bottom line here? Like, how did they measure overall performance?
Wow.
What did they find? They looked at two main things: accounting performance, which covers things like return on assets, and then market performance, which is measured by something called Tobin's Q.
Tobin's Q. Okay, break that down for me. What exactly is that, and why should I care?
Sure. It's essentially a popularity score that the stock market gives a company. It tells you how much investors are willing to pay for a company's stock compared to the value of its actual assets.
Gotcha.
Higher Tobin's Q means that investors believe the company is worth more than just the sum of its parts. They see it as having growth potential, a bright future.
So they're betting on a racehorse with good bloodlines. They think it has the potential to win big.
Exactly.
Interesting. So what did the research say about family firms and Tobin's Q?
Well, here's the big reveal. Family firms, on average, had higher Tobin's Q scores and better accounting performance than non-family firms.
Wow, that's pretty counterintuitive. I think most people would assume the opposite. What explains that? Is it just that long-term thinking we talked about?
It's definitely a big part of it. That long-term focus, combined with their reputation and the lower cost of debt, it gives them a real edge. But there's another layer to this. The research also looked at how the amount of family ownership affects performance.
That makes sense. I mean, there's got to be a limit, right? Like, if the family owns 90% of the company and treats it like their personal piggy bank, that can't be good for anyone.
Exactly. The relationship between family ownership and performance, it isn't a straight line upwards.
So there's a sweet spot.
You could say that. The study found that performance tends to peak when family ownership is around 30%. After that, it starts to decline. Although, on average, it still remains better than non-family firms.
The Goldilocks effect. Not too much, not too little, just right.
Exactly.
Okay, this is all fascinating, but, I have to ask the skeptical question here. how do we know this isn't just a correlation? Like, maybe these family firms perform well for other reasons, and the families just happen to stick around because the business is doing well anyway. It's that chicken and egg problem, right?
You've hit the nail on the head. That's always a challenge in research like this.
So how did the researchers deal with that?
Well, they used a technique called instrumental variables to try to isolate the actual impact of family ownership. It's a way of filtering out all the noise. That could make it look like family ownership matters when it really doesn't.
Okay.
Imagine trying to figure out if a new type of fertilizer makes plants grow taller.
Okay.
You have to account for all sorts of things, right? Like the amount of sunlight, the type of soil, even random variations between plants. Instrumental variables help you do that.
Gotcha. So even after filtering out all that noise, did they still find that family ownership makes a difference?
Yes, they did. While it's not perfectly clear-cut, the study still found a positive impact of family ownership on performance, even after accounting for all those other factors.
So it's not just that families are clinging to successful companies, their involvement is actually contributing to that success.
Exactly.
That's a pretty big deal.
It really is. It challenges a lot of the assumptions
Yeah.
that we might have about family businesses.
Okay, so to recap what we've learned so far, family firms are more common than we thought. And despite some potential pitfalls, they actually tend to outperform non-family firms.
Right.
They've got that long-term perspective, a good reputation that helps them get loans. And when family ownership is around that 30% sweet spot, things really seem to click. But I'm sure there's more to the story, right?
Absolutely. This research raises a lot of interesting questions about how family businesses operate and what their role is in the broader economy.
Okay, I'm all ears. What else did this deep dive uncover?
Well, as we've been talking about all these strengths of family businesses, it's got me thinking about the bigger picture.
Oh, yeah.
Like what?
Well, I mean, like,
The
implications for, capitalism as a whole.
Okay, yeah. What happens to our ideas about how the economy works if a big chunk of the major players aren't just chasing those short-term profits, but are driven by these family legacies and a long-term vision, Right. It really flips the script, doesn't it? The traditional capitalist model. It assumes that companies are basically machines, right, programmed to maximize shareholder value above all else.
Yeah.
But if family businesses are playing a different game with the different set of motivations, well, that could have a real ripple effect on how the whole economy functions.
I like to think of it like this. Instead of a bunch of speedboats all trying to, outmaneuver each other, to grab the biggest catch of the day, you've got these big, sturdy ships sailing along, thinking about where they want to be in 10, 20, even 50 years.
I love that analogy. And it's not just a theoretical difference either. There's research showing that family businesses, they're often more likely to engage in those socially responsible practices.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They're more deeply rooted in their communities, right? So they're more invested in protecting the environment.
Yeah.
And treating their employees well.
It's like they see themselves as stewards, not just temporary occupants of the resources they're using. So maybe family businesses could actually be the key to a more ethical, sustainable kind of capitalism. One that isn't just about squeezing every last penny out of the system, but is focused on building something that lasts, something that benefits everyone, not just the shareholders.
That's a really compelling argument.
It is, isn't it?
But, we have to be realistic, too. Not all family businesses are beacons of virtue, right?
Yeah, true.
There are plenty of examples of family firms engaging in unethical practices or making decisions that prioritize family interests over, the common good.
And we can't forget those potential downsides of family control we talked about earlier, right?
Right.
Things like nepotism, resistance to change, conflicts of interest. Just because a company has family in its name doesn't automatically make it a good actor.
For sure. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all situation. Yeah. But I think this research gives us a lot to think about, challenges us to think critically about how businesses operate, what motivates them, and what role they play in society. It's not as simple as we might assume.
Right. It's like we've pulled back the curtain and seen that there's more to the story than meets the eye.
Exactly.
And that complexity. Well, that's what makes it so fascinating.
Absolutely.
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps in exploring this connection between family businesses and, the future of capitalism?
Well, I think there's a whole universe of research waiting to be done. We need to dig deeper into how family ownership affects things like, environmental practices, employee treatment, long-term investment decisions.
Maybe even explore whether there are ways to encourage more companies, even those that aren't family controlled, to adopt that long-term legacy-focused mindset.
Right, yeah.
Because if we can figure out what makes family firms tick, maybe we can apply those lessons to create a more sustainable and equitable economy for everyone.
Absolutely. It's about looking for those best practices, regardless of where they come from.
Yeah.
And seeing if we can scale them up to have a bigger impact.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of family businesses. It's been a journey full of unexpected twists and turns. And, well, we've come away with more questions than answers, I think.
But that's what makes it so exciting, right?
It is.
We've uncovered this hidden layer of complexity in the business world. And we've glimpsed the possibility of a different kind of capitalism, one that's more rooted in values, long-term thinking, and social responsibility.
Absolutely. As always, we encourage you to keep exploring this topic. Think about the role family businesses play in your own community and how their values and motivations shape the world around us.
And if you're lucky enough to be part of a family business, take this knowledge to heart, embrace those strengths, be mindful of the potential pitfalls, and build something you can be proud of, not just for yourselves, but for generations to come.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time with a whole new set of insights to uncover. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. You know, it's funny, we've been talking about all this research and all the stuff about how family businesses work, and it makes you wonder, about the even bigger picture.
What do you mean?
What does it mean for our ideas about how the economy works if a big chunk of these companies, especially the really big ones, aren't just chasing profits,
I see,
but are driven by these family legacies and a much longer-term vision?
Yeah, it really challenges the traditional view, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
The classic capitalist model assumes that companies are just these profit-maximizing machines, right?
Right.
But family businesses, they might be playing by a different set of rules.
Exactly.
And if that's the case, well, that could have huge implications for how the whole system functions.
It's instead of everyone just sprinting for the finish line, some of these companies are in it for the long haul.
Yeah, they're building something to last.
And maybe, just maybe, that's a good thing. Maybe family businesses could be a path to a more ethical, more sustainable kind of capitalism.
It's an interesting thought.
One that isn't just about squeezing every last drop out of the system, but about building something that benefits everyone in the long run.
I like that.
But we have to be realistic too, right?
Of course.
Not every family business is perfect.
Definitely not.
There are plenty of examples of, family firms making bad decisions.
Wow.
Or even behaving unethically.
Right.
So it's not like having family in the name automatically makes you a saint.
It's more complicated than that.
For sure.
But I think this research gives us a lot to consider. It pushes us to question our assumptions about how businesses work and what their role in society should be.
It's like we've pulled back the curtain and seen that there's a whole other layer of complexity that we didn't even realize was there.
Exactly.
And that's what makes it so exciting to explore.
Absolutely.
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps in figuring all of this out?
Well, I think we need more research to really understand how family businesses impact things, like their environmental practices and how they treat their employees and their long-term investment strategies.
And maybe we can even figure out how to encourage more companies, even those that aren't family-owned, to adopt that long-term perspective, that focus on building something that lasts.
Right.
Because if we can learn from the successes of family firms, maybe we can create a better economic system for everyone.
I think that's a great goal.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of family businesses.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
Full of surprises.
And, as always, more questions than answers.
But hey, that's what keeps things interesting.
That's the fun part.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.